It happened the way most catastrophes in Peggy Dunbar's life happened, with her feet moving faster than her brain and gravity seizing the opportunity. One moment she was leaning over the spring of unspoken truths, admiring the way the sacred water shimmered like liquid moonstone in the afternoon light. The next, a root, ancient, knotted, and deeply unhelpful, caught her ankle, and she pitched forward with a yelp that echoed off the surrounding birch trees with a clarity that suggested even nature wanted witnesses. The splash was magnificent. She went under completely, arms flailing, mouth open in a silent scream that became significantly less silent when she inhaled half the spring. The water tasted like cold iron and wildflowers, with a sharp herbal bite underneath that she would later describe, somewhat inaccurately, as minty. Her wolf, Grit, had been mid-thought, something dry and logistical about the upcoming pack feast. When the submersion hit, the sacred water flooded their shared consciousness like sunlight through a cracked door, and Grit's carefully maintained composure shattered. "What?" Grit said, with the particular horror of someone whose filing system has just been upended. "Have you done?" Callum was already moving. The alpha king of the Dunbar territories, a man who had once stared down a charging grizzly without flinching, vaulted over the stone ledge of the spring with a speed that spoke less to his royal authority and more to the raw animal panic of a mate watching his other half disappear beneath sacred water. He hauled her out in one motion, his arms locked around her waist, and set her on the mossy bank like she was something fragile he'd nearly broken. "Peggy?" His voice was steady, his hands were not. "Are you hurt?" She coughed up a mouthful of the spring, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and looked up at him. His dark hair had fallen from its tie. His shirt was soaked from the chest down. Water dripped from his jaw. He looked, she thought, like a painting of a worried god, if gods wore linen and had a small scar above their left eyebrow from the time they'd walked into a stable door at age 9. "You are," she said, and the words came out before she had any say in the matter. "Unfairly handsome when you're panicking. It's distracting. I lose whole trains of thought. I've been meaning to tell you that for years." Callum blinked. Marcus, Callum's beta, and the most nervously competent man in the Northern Territories, dropped the armful of ceremonial linens he'd been carrying. "Oh, no." "Oh, yes," Peggy said, turning to him with wide, startled eyes that suggested she was as surprised by her own words as everyone else. "Also, Marcus, you have flour on your collar. You've been in the kitchens again. You only go to the kitchens when you're avoiding Nessa, which means you've done something you feel guilty about but aren't brave enough to confess. Just tell her. She already knows." Marcus's face went through several colors in quick succession, settling on a shade best described as mortified plum. Callum caught her shoulders. "Peggy, how much of the water did you swallow?" "Enough to fill a bathtub, I think. Possibly more. It's hard to say. My internal measurements are compromised." She paused, cocked her head, and added, "Your hands are very warm. I like your hands. They make me feel like nothing bad can actually happen, which is statistically untrue but emotionally very convincing." Callum's wolf, Rook, stirred in the back of his mind with the cool precision of a military strategist assessing a sudden change in battlefield conditions. "The mate has been compromised. Verbal containment failure. Recommend immediate extraction to a secure location." That, as it turned out, was the most sensible suggestion anyone would make for the next several days. The spring of unspoken truths had been sacred to the Dunbar pack for centuries. During a bonding ceremony, newly mated pairs would each take a single, measured sip. One sip, one truth, spoken to each other as a foundation for their life together. It was delicate, ritualistic, controlled. Peggy had not taken a sip. She had taken a bath, possibly a swim, and had swallowed enough enchanted water to fuel a small truth-telling army. Old Marin, the pack's healer and keeper of the spring's traditions, examined Peggy in their private quarters with a mixture of professional concern and poorly concealed fascination. "It's an overdose," Marin said, adjusting her spectacles. "A significant one. The spring's magic is working through her system the way any excess would. It has to run its course." "How long?" Callum asked. He was standing by the window, arms crossed, his jaw set in the way that meant he was working very hard to project calm authority while internally recalculating every plan he'd made for the next week. Hard to say. Days, perhaps a week, maybe longer. Marin peered at Peggy, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a fur, her hair still damp. The magic will force out every truth her mind holds. The trivial ones, the funny ones, the deep ones. All of it. She won't be able to stop it. Every truth, Callum repeated. Every single one. Marin snapped her bag shut. And it won't matter if anyone's listening. The magic doesn't care about audience. She'll talk to walls, to furniture, to an empty room at 3 a.m. The compulsion is to speak, not to communicate. Keeping her isolated won't stop the words. It'll just limit the damage. And if she's around people? Then every wolf in earshot gets the unfiltered version. But it's worse than that. Marin hesitated. The overdose isn't just affecting her human side. Her wolf will be broadcasting too. Unfiltered, to any bonded wolf within the castle grounds. Maybe a quarter mile, perhaps a bit more. In human form, that's the range. If she shifts, Marin shook her head. Don't let her shift. In wolf form, the broadcast range opens up to the entire territory. Every wolf from here to the northern border. In Peggy's mind, Grit processed this information with the controlled despair of a tactician watching a battle plan disintegrate. This is a containment failure of catastrophic proportions. My operational security has been compromised. Every wolf in this territory is going to hear every tactical assessment I have ever made about their combat readiness, personal hygiene, and life choices. She paused. I have opinions about Duncan's tracking form that I have been keeping to myself for 11 years. 11 years of professional restraint, about to be undone by a tree root. Also, Peggy announced to the room, because the magic had no sense of timing, Callum talks in his sleep. It's mostly strategic assessments of grain storage, which is very him, and also sometimes he says my name in this particular way that makes me want to cry, because it sounds like I'm the answer to a question he hasn't figured out yet. I've never told him because I didn't want him to feel self-conscious about it. Callum stared at her. Marin stared at her. Marcus, who had unwisely followed them inside, backed slowly toward the door. He should also know, Peggy continued, her voice taking on a dreamy, slightly feverish quality, that when he reads reports at his desk and his brow furrows like that, exactly like that, yes, that one, I have to physically stop myself from crossing the room and kissing him. Every single time. It's been a consistent problem for our entire marriage. I have no solution. Callum's expression underwent a journey. It started at alarm, detoured through disbelief, passed briefly through a landscape of unexpected tenderness, and arrived at something that looked remarkably like a man who had just been handed a gift he didn't know he'd been waiting for. Rook observed, "The mate's unfiltered state is providing intelligence we did not previously have access to. This is strategically useful. Also, she thinks about kissing us while we read grain reports." Filing that under relevant. The plan was simple. Keep Peggy in their private chambers until the magic wore off. No visitors, no pack members, no wolves within broadcasting range. Marcus would handle the day-to-day governance. Callum would check in between duties. It was sensible, contained, and, like most plans involving Peggy Dunbar, lasted approximately 4 hours. The fever came first. Not dangerous, Marin assured them. Just the magic working through her system, burning hot and restless. Peggy couldn't sleep. She couldn't sit still. She paced their chambers like a caged wolf, the truths spilling from her in a steady, unstoppable stream. To Callum when he was there, to the walls and furniture when he wasn't. Marin had been right. The magic didn't care about audience. "The way you stand in doorways," she told the empty room at 2 a.m, because he'd gone to check the watch rotation and the truth didn't care. "You fill them. Not because you're large. You are large, but that's beside the point. But because you stand like the doorway exists because you allow it to. I find this absurd and also devastatingly attractive." She informed the bedroom curtains that Callum had beautiful hands and a terrible habit of cracking his knuckles during negotiations, which made his opponents nervous and she was fairly certain he knew this and did it on purpose. And it was the most specifically Callum thing she could imagine. She told the fireplace that she'd once watched him carry a wolf pup who'd twisted her ankle back from the training fields, and the pup had fallen asleep in his arms, and Peggy had stood in the hallway and felt her entire heart rearrange itself around the image, like it was the organizing principle of her life. Then the truths turned inward, and the comedy got worse. I once told Marcus I couldn't attend a border briefing because I had a headache, she announced to an empty wardrobe. I didn't have a headache. I was rereading a terrible romance novel that I'd already read 4 times. The hero had a jawline and a difficult past, and I needed to know if he was going to be emotionally vulnerable in chapter 19. He was. I cried. She told the water jug that she had been secretly keeping score of how many times Callum won arguments against her versus how many times she won, and the current tally was 112 to 147 in her favor. But she'd been generously awarding herself points for arguments she'd won silently, by being right and not mentioning it. She informed Callum's reading chair, sincerely as if it could hear her, that she sometimes pretended to be asleep when he came to bed late so that she could enjoy the moment when he carefully, gently moved her hair off her face without waking her, because it was the tenderest thing anyone had ever done, and she didn't want him to stop doing it because he knew she was watching. Callum, who had returned from the watch rotation in time to hear this last one, stood in the doorway and did not move for a very long time. In his mind, Rook was processing. Rook had been processing for hours. The wolf had built his entire operational framework around threat assessment, territorial analysis, and tactical efficiency. He had no filing system for this. The mate's declarations were arriving faster than he could categorize them, and they did not conform to any existing schema. Incoming data does not match standard classifications, Rook reported, with the tone of a bureaucrat whose forms had caught fire. The mate's testimony is neither threat, opportunity, nor neutral observation. It appears to be emotional intelligence. I do not have a folder for emotional intelligence. I am creating one. It is already full. I am creating a second one. Also full. This is unsustainable. Request additional storage. Callum almost laughed. Almost. But the thing about the hair, the careful, calculated pretending, that had landed somewhere he couldn't laugh about. On the other side of the castle, every wolf within range was receiving Grit's parallel broadcast, and it was causing chaos of a different kind. Duncan's wolf, a stolid creature named Anvil, relayed to Duncan that Grit had delivered a comprehensive review of his tracking posture, spanning their entire professional relationship. His left shoulder drops, Grit had announced to anyone receiving. It telegraphs his direction. I have watched him do this 406 times. I stopped counting after 400, but then he did it again, and the number felt incomplete. His instinct recovery is adequate, but not inspired. He overcompensates with speed when precision would serve. I have been saying this internally for over a decade. It feels oddly liberating to finally share. Duncan, to his credit, went out to the training yard that afternoon and asked his sparring partner to watch his left shoulder. Marcus's wolf, Fen, a patient, long-suffering creature with the temperament of an exhausted librarian, received an unsolicited performance review. Competent. Undervalued. Worries too much. Would benefit from a decision-making framework that does not involve stress-eating pastries in the kitchen at midnight. The pastry situation has escalated. His mate suspects. I like his mate. She has good instincts and excellent aim. He should tell her about the pastries before she finds out on her own. She will find out on her own. Fen relayed this to Marcus in the gentlest possible terms, which is to say, he conveyed the broad strokes while omitting the part about the pastries. Marcus went to the kitchens anyway, force of habit. But it was the younger wolves who took the broadcasts hardest. A wolf named Cedar, bonded to a junior warrior called Tomas, received a brief, devastating assessment. Good instincts, lacks confidence. His father's expectations are too loud in his head. The boy has more talent than he credits himself for. Tell him. Cedar told him. Tomas stood in the training yard for a long time afterward, very still, and then went and found his father. Callum was in his second meeting of the day, a tedious review of grain stores with two pack quartermasters who had the combined charisma of damp firewood, when Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking like a man who had been asked to deliver news he did not want to deliver. "She's out," Marcus said. Callum was on his feet before the second word landed. "How?" She walked past Tomas. He stepped aside. He stepped aside. She told him his father brags about him at the tavern and calls him my boy, and his voice goes soft. He was crying. She walked right past him. Callum closed his eyes for a single, controlled breath. When he opened them, Rook was already mapping the most likely routes through the castle. The mate is fever-driven. She will follow the bond. She's looking for you. Predictive path, east corridor through the Great Hall toward whatever room you're in. Intercept in 4 minutes if you leave now. He left now. Peggy, meanwhile, was having a wonderful time, or rather, Peggy was delirious, slightly feverish, and wandering through the corridors of her own home, with the serene determination of someone who had one objective and no social filters. She found 2 warriors sparring in the courtyard and stopped to watch. "Your footwork is identical," she announced. "You were clearly trained by the same person. You should stop pretending this rivalry is genuine when you're obviously best friends who enjoy the performance. Also, Hamish, your guard drops when you laugh. Stop laughing mid-bout." Hamish and Cora looked at each other. Cora started laughing. Hamish's guard dropped. They both collapsed into a heap. Peggy moved on. She told a passing servant that the kitchens were under-seasoning the lamb and over-salting the bread. "Just reverse it," she said. "It's not complicated. Also, your apron is inside out, and it has been for 2 days, and no one has told you, which I think is unkind. There, now someone has told you." She rounded a corner, encountered a stone bust of Callum's grandfather in an alcove, and stopped dead. "Your grandson is a better king than you were," she told the bust, with the calm certainty of someone settling a matter of historical record. "He just doesn't know it yet. Also, I'm fairly certain someone chipped your ear in 1847 and glued it back on crooked. It's been bothering me for 6 years." In the laundry, she paused to inform old Bridget that the sheets smelled wonderful and that her work was underappreciated by the pack at large. "You keep us in clean linens and nobody thanks you. I'm thanking you now. Your folding technique is impeccable. I've tried to replicate it, and I cannot." Bridget, who had not received a compliment in approximately 8 years, burst into tears and had to sit down. Then Peggy ran into old Fergus, the pack's senior tracker, in the east corridor, and the streak broke. "Fergus," she said, with the bright, unfocused clarity of the fever, "your tracking reports are thorough and reliable, and you have never once received the credit you deserve. Also," she paused, the truth changed direction. "Also, your breath has been terrible for approximately 3 months, and no one will tell you because they respect you too much. It's your back molar. Please see Marin. Everyone who sits downwind of you at meals is suffering in polite silence. I am one of those people." Fergus stood in the corridor for a very long time after she left, one hand covering his mouth, the other reaching tentatively for the offending molar. Outside, 2 young wolves, shifted and play-fighting in the muddy yard behind the stables, froze as Grit's broadcast washed over them. "The gray one needs to stop leading with his right flank. He does it every time. His partner knows and is being kind about it. This is not kindness, this is enabling. Correct the flank, or I will make this assessment daily until it is corrected." The gray wolf looked at his partner. His partner looked back. They both shifted to human form, naked and mud-streaked, and immediately began arguing about the right flank issue. Callum found Peggy in the great hall. It was between meals and mercifully empty, just her and the echoing stone and the afternoon light coming through the high windows. She was standing in a patch of that light, the fur cloak trailing behind her, looking up at the tapestry of his great-grandfather with an expression of intense concentration. "The nose is wrong," she announced to no one in particular. "His nose wasn't that straight. Your grandmother told me. She said he had a bump on the bridge from a fight he got into at 16, and he was very vain about it. The artist flattered him." "Peggy," She turned. Her face, flushed with fever, broke into a smile so wide and so genuine it physically hurt him. "There you are," she said, as if she'd been searching for him across a vast, impossible distance, and not a moderately sized castle. "I was looking for you. I'm always looking for you. Did you know that? Even when you're right beside me, some part of me is still looking for you, checking that you're there, making sure you haven't disappeared. It's exhausting and wonderful, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in this world." He crossed the hall and caught her as she swayed, the fever making her unsteady. She leaned into him, her forehead against his chest, and sighed. "You smell like pine and leather, and the specific kind of worry that means you're carrying something you won't tell anyone about. I wish you'd tell me. You can tell me anything. I would hold every terrible thing you've ever thought, and I would not love you less. That is a promise I make to you every morning when I wake up and see you sleeping beside me. And I am so grateful, Callum. I am so grateful that you're mine." He held her, one hand in her hair, and said nothing. There was nothing to say. His throat was too tight for words. Rook was very still. The wolf had been building a new filing system all day, and it was already catastrophically over capacity. "We do not deserve her," Rook said at last. "That is not self-pity. It is a tactical assessment of resource allocation. She is too good. The universe made an accounting error in our favor." A pause. "I have attempted to file this interaction under intelligence briefing. It does not fit. I have attempted threat assessment. It does not fit. I have created a new category. It is called the mate. It is the largest folder I have ever maintained. I am restructuring." He guided her back to their chambers, his arm around her waist, her head against his shoulder. She talked the whole way, about the light in the hallways, about the way his heartbeat sounded through his shirt, about a dream she'd had once where they were both wolves running along a cliff edge above the sea, and she'd never been less afraid of falling. He listened to every word. He would remember every word. He didn't know that yet, but he would. Marcus was waiting for him outside the chambers, leaning against the stone wall with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had been rehearsing a diplomatic speech and was now seriously considering abandoning it in favor of directness. "So," Marcus said. Callum shut the door carefully behind him. Inside, Peggy was finally sleeping, the fever pulling her under like a warm tide. "So," she told Bridget in the laundry that her folding technique was impeccable. Bridget is weeping. Happy tears, apparently. And she told the two sparring warriors that their rivalry was performative and they're actually best friends. They didn't deny it. Hamish is buying Cora a drink. "That's not catastrophic." "No," Marcus agreed, "and that's the problem." Callum looked at him. "If she were saying terrible things, we could contain it, discredit it as the fever talking, but she's being kind. She's telling people the truth about themselves, and most of it is good. The pack is talking, and what they're saying is that their queen sees them. Do you understand how hard that is to walk back?" "Why would I want to walk it back?" Marcus rubbed his face. "Because she also told your great-grandfather's tapestry that his nose was wrong. And at some point she's going to tell someone something that isn't kind, and we need a plan for that." "She won't. You don't know that." "I do, actually." Callum leaned against the opposite wall. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Because I've been listening to her for 3 days, Marcus. And every truth that comes out of her, every single one, comes from the same place. She pays attention. She cares about people, not as a strategy, as a reflex. The spring isn't revealing something ugly. It's revealing who she's been the whole time." "Mostly," Marcus said. "She told Fergus his breath is terrible." "Is it?" "Objectively catastrophic. He's seeing Marin tomorrow." "Then she did him a service." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then his face shifted, the dry amusement giving way to something more careful. "You know you can't stay with her every hour. The Eastern Timber dispute needs a ruling by week's end or Haldane's faction will start cutting without permission. That delegation won't wait." Callum knew. The Alpha King's word was final, but only if the Alpha King was present to give it. Some things couldn't be delegated, and Haldane's timber claim was one of them. The old wolf had been pushing the boundary for months, and a ruling delivered by Marcus would be dismissed as secondary authority. It had to come from Callum, face to face. "I'll go tomorrow. 3 hours. 4 at most." He hated every word. "Post the guard rotation tight while I'm away. Double at the corridor." Marcus nodded, but his expression didn't ease. "There's something else. Gregor's been asking questions." Callum's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. "What kind of questions?" "The kind a man asks when he's looking for a foothold. He's been talking to the older wolves, asking how the queen is doing. Very concerned, very sympathetic." Marcus paused. "Very strategic. Keep an eye on him." "Already am. Fen's been tracking his wolf's movements. She's been restless, circling." "Good." Callum pushed off the wall. "Double the guard on our chambers. And Marcus, don't eat pastries when you're stressed. Nessa worries." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "How did you... She told you that too?" "She tells me everything now. It's a whole thing." Marcus left, muttering something about privacy and sacred water and the general unfairness of the universe. Callum almost smiled. Almost. The suggestion to try shifting came from Marin on the second day. "It's possible," the healer said carefully, "that shifting might help burn through the magic faster. The wolf form processes things differently, more instinct, less language. It could quiet the human side." Callum looked at Peggy, who was sitting in a chair by the fire, intermittently dozing and then waking to deliver observations about the quality of the firewood, the structural integrity of the mantelpiece, and the fact that Callum's reading chair was positioned at the exact angle from which he could watch the door and the window simultaneously, because even in his own home he was always on guard. And she wished he could rest, really rest, just once. "No," Peggy said, suddenly alert. More than alert, lucid. For the first time in 2 days, the fever haze cleared from her eyes, and what was underneath was sharp and frightened. "It might help." "I said no." Her voice didn't waver, but her hands did. She pressed them flat against her knees. "I don't know what shifting would do right now. My wolf is already broadcasting to every wolf in range. If I shift, I lose the last bit of control I have. Right now, I can at least try to direct it, steer the worst of it. If I'm fully wolf, it's just instinct and grit at full volume. I can't do that to her." She looked down at her hands. The lucidity was still there, fragile and temporary, a window in the fog. "You know what the worst part is?" she said quietly. "It's not the embarrassment. It's that every thought I've ever had is now public property. Every private thing. Every tender, ridiculous, embarrassing thing I've ever thought about anyone in this castle. They're going to hear it whether I want them to or not. I've spent my whole life choosing my words carefully, choosing what to share and what to keep, and now I don't get to choose anymore." Her jaw tightened. "That's not who I am. I am someone who chooses." The room was quiet. Callum reached over and took her hand. She gripped it hard enough to whiten her knuckles. "This will end," he said. "I know. But right now I'm inside it, and it's..." She stopped. The fever was pulling at her again, the clarity softening at the edges. "I'm scared, Callum. I'm not supposed to say that, but apparently I don't get to decide what I'm supposed to say anymore, so... I'm scared." He held her hand and said nothing, because sometimes that was the truest thing he could offer. Grit, for her part, supported this decision with unusual vehemence. "Correct. In wolf form, I will be the primary consciousness, broadcasting at full range. Not the castle grounds, the entire territory. Every wolf from here to the northern border, receiving every thought I have ever suppressed. I have opinions about the Eastern Border Patrol rotation that would cause a mutiny. I have a ranked assessment of every wolf in this pack's dental hygiene. I have a list. The list has footnotes. No shifting. Final answer." Callum almost smiled. Outside the window, the evening patrol was shifting for their run. 6 wolves moving through the courtyard in easy, practiced succession, fur catching the last of the light as they loped toward the tree line. The casual rhythm of it, bodies flowing between forms like water changing direction, was so ordinary it was almost invisible. This was what pack life looked like. The shift wasn't an event, it was breathing. "All right," Marin said. "No shifting. We wait it out." But waiting it out was not the same as staying hidden, and the pack was starting to talk. Not maliciously. The Dunbar wolves were loyal, and Peggy was beloved. But curiosity is its own kind of gravity, and whispers move through a pack the way scent moves on the wind. By the 3rd day, everyone knew the Queen had overdosed on the truth spring. Most of the pack had heard enough second-hand truths, both human and wolf, to be equal parts entertained and nervous. The warriors traded stories in the training yard. "She told Hamish his guard drops when he laughs," one said, shifting back to human form after a morning circuit and pulling on trousers, steam rising from his skin in the cool air. "He's been drilling it for 2 days straight. Won't admit why." "Grit told my wolf that my right flank is a liability," another said, rubbing his shoulder. She wasn't wrong. "She told Bridget in the laundry that her folding technique was impeccable. Bridget's been walking around like she won the Highland Games." The pack was discovering something unexpected about their queen's unfiltered mind. It was mostly kind. Sharp, yes. Uncomfortably precise, absolutely. But underneath every observation was a bedrock of genuine care. She noticed people. She noticed the things about them that no one else bothered to see. Their small skills, their private struggles, their quiet acts of love. The truth spring hadn't revealed a queen who secretly despised her pack. It had revealed a queen who was paying attention. One person was neither entertained nor touched. He was calculating. Gregor had been an elder of the Dunbar pack for 20 years. He was smart, careful, and possessed of the specific kind of ambition that disguised itself as concern for tradition. He had never openly challenged Callum's authority. The Alpha King's power was absolute and earned, and Gregor was not foolish enough to test it directly. But he had spent years quietly cultivating allies among the older, more conservative members of the pack. Wolves who remembered Callum's father. Wolves who sometimes wondered, quietly and never aloud, whether the sun measured up. Gregor saw the truth spring situation not as a crisis, but as an opening. A queen who could not lie, who was feverish and disoriented, who would answer any question with brutal, unfiltered honesty. That was a weapon, if you knew the right question to ask. Not about her. About him. About the doubts that every leader carries and every rival hopes to expose. He chose his moment with the patience of a man who had been waiting 20 years for a crack he could wedge open. The 4th evening, the evening Callum was away settling Haldane's timber dispute and wouldn't return until nightfall, Gregor called a gathering of the pack's senior members in the long hall. Nothing unusual about that. Elders could convene a meeting for pack business. But an hour before the meeting, he'd sent Tomas, still the guard on Peggy's corridor, still too young to question an elder's authority, on an errand to the kitchens to fetch refreshments for the gathering. A reasonable request from a senior elder. A 15-minute gap in the rotation. He didn't need to fetch Peggy. The fever did the work. It always drove her toward Callum, and Callum had been in the long hall that morning. The scent trail was fresh enough. Peggy appeared in the doorway wrapped in a wool shawl, her hair loose, her eyes bright and unfocused. She scanned the room the way she always did, searching for the one face that would settle the restless compass in her chest. He wasn't there. He was in the armory, 2 corridors over, but 30 of the pack's most senior wolves were, including 6 elders, and Gregor was already on his feet. "My queen." His voice carried perfectly, warm, concerned, calibrated for an audience. "We've been so worried about you. Come, sit. You look unwell." She drifted in. The fever made everything soft at the edges, and these were her people. She trusted them the way she trusted the walls of this castle, completely, instinctively, and without examining the foundation. Gregor waited until she was seated, until every elder was watching. until the room was perfectly, attentively silent. Then he leaned forward, his face arranged in a mask of thoughtful concern, and spoke loud enough for every ear. My queen, we've all been thinking about the burdens our king carries, the weight of leadership. Tell us, honestly as only you can right now, does King Callum carry doubts about his rule? Does he question whether he is fit for the throne? The room went cold. Every elder understood the shape of the trap. If the queen confirmed that her mate harbored self-doubt in front of the senior pack, under the compulsion of sacred magic, it would be a crack in the foundation that no amount of authority could seal. A king who doubted himself, confirmed by his own mate. Undeniable. Peggy looked at Gregor. Even through the fever, even through the fog of the spring's magic, something in her registered the direction of the question. Not its intent. She was too far gone for strategy. But it was pointed at Callum, and anything pointed at Callum passed through her first. It always had. The truth rose, as it always did, unstoppable and unfiltered. But truths have shapes, and the shape of this one was nothing Gregor expected. Callum doesn't doubt his rule, Peggy said, and her voice rang through the hall with the clean, bright clarity of a bell struck in a silent church. He questions his decisions the way any good leader should, carefully, honestly, and always with the pack's well-being as his measure. He revises, he listens, he changes his mind when the evidence demands it. And he does not mistake stubbornness for strength. She swayed slightly, then steadied herself on the arm of the chair. He sat up 3 nights in a row last winter when Duncan's daughter was sick, because Duncan couldn't leave her side and someone had to cover the Northern Watch. He didn't tell anyone. He never tells anyone. He rebuilt Martin's barn himself after the storm because Martin's pride wouldn't accept charity. So Callum framed it as structural inspection and brought his own tools. He made Martin hold the planks so it would feel like they'd done it together. The room was utterly silent. Not the tense silence of a room holding its breath, but the deeper silence of people hearing something they needed to hear. He remembers the name of every wolf pup born in his territory. Every single one. He remembers their birthdays. He asks after them when he sees their parents. Not because it's strategy, because he actually cares. And caring is something he does so quietly that most of you have mistaken it for distance. She blinked, and her eyes focused for a moment, sharper than they'd been in days, and they landed on Gregor with a precision that made the old wolf flinch. He is the best man I have ever known, Peggy said, and the fever made her voice tremble, but it did not make it weak. And I am not saying that because I am his mate. I am saying it because it is the truth. And right now, the truth is the only thing I have. She paused, looked around the room as if noticing for the first time that she was in public, and added, "Why is everyone staring? Is there food? I'm very hungry." Gregor sat down slowly. His face was the color of cold ash. Every elder in the room was looking at him now, not at Peggy. And what they saw was a man whose careful machination had detonated in his hands. He had aimed the spring at Callum's insecurities. Instead, it had illuminated his character, refracted through the one person who knew him most completely and could not lie. In every wolf mind within range, Grit delivered a final broadcast. The human called Gregor has attempted to weaponize this situation against our mate. His wolf should be embarrassed. I am filing a formal complaint with whoever administers these things. Also, for the record, his cardio is terrible, and his wolf's sightlines in this room were poorly positioned. He sat with his back to 2 exits. Amateur. Old Fen, Marcus's wolf, relayed the gist to Marcus, who rode hard to the timber boundary and told Callum everything. The question, the answer, the silence that followed. Callum listened without expression. Rook, however, did not. The elder called Gregor has miscalculated at every level, Rook said, and his voice had a quality Callum had never heard before. Not cold analysis, not tactical detachment, but something closer to fury, processed through a very precise filing system. He assumed the mate's truths would be weapons. He did not account for the possibility that her truths would be armor. His strategic model was fundamentally flawed because it did not include the variable of genuine love. This is a common error among those who do not experience it. I am filing him under threat, neutralized by incompetence. Callum rode back. He went straight to the long hall. He did not look at Gregor. He walked to Peggy, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, handed her a bread roll he'd grabbed from the kitchens on the way, and guided her out. The pack watched them go. Not a word was spoken. None was needed. As they passed through the doorway, Peggy looked up at him and said, through a mouthful of bread, "You came fast. You always come fast when it's me." "Yes," he said, "I do." "It's because you love me." "It is." "I love you too. I don't think I say that enough when I'm not enchanted. I should fix that." "You can fix it when you're better." "Promise?" "Promise." Behind them, in the long hall, the pack's senior wolves sat in a silence that had the quality of a verdict. No one looked at Gregor. No one had to. The elder stared at his hands for a very long time, and the hands had no comfort to offer. That night, Callum couldn't sleep. Peggy could. The fever had finally broken sometime after the bread roll, and she'd fallen into the first deep, untroubled sleep she'd had in days. She was curled against him, her breathing slow and even, her hand resting on his chest in the exact spot it always found, as if even in sleep she was checking that his heart was still beating. He stared at the ceiling and listened to her breathe, and thought about what she'd said in the long hall. Not the words themselves, he'd already memorized those, had felt them land in the packed earth of his chest like seeds in winter ground. But what struck him, what kept him awake, was the shape of the thing underneath the words. She had known about the Northern Watch, about Martin's Barn, about the pup names. She had known all of it, not because he'd told her, but because she'd been watching, for years. Quietly, without comment, cataloging every small act of care he performed and never mentioned, and holding them in some private archive of her heart, like evidence in a case she was always building. A case for him. A case that he was good. He had spent his entire reign wondering, in the small hours, whether the pack saw through him, whether they sensed the gap between the king he was and the king his father had been. And his mate had been keeping a running inventory of his worth that was more detailed and more generous than anything he would ever have compiled for himself. Rook stirred. "You are awake." He didn't respond. "You are awake because the mate's testimony contradicts your operational self-assessment. Her data is more complete than yours. She has been collecting it longer. The logical conclusion is that your self-assessment is flawed, not her observations." A long silence. "I have been your wolf for your entire life," Rook continued, and the precision in his voice wavered for a fraction of a second, the wolf equivalent of a hand trembling. "I have assessed every threat, mapped every room, filed every interaction under the appropriate tactical heading. I believed my records were comprehensive." A pause. "The mate has better records than I do. She has been tracking your kindness the way I track sightlines. She files your quiet acts of care the way I file exit routes. Her surveillance is more thorough than mine. This is..." Another pause, longer this time. "This is humbling. I do not enjoy being humbled. But the data is the data. File her assessment as the primary record. Overwrite the old one. Go to sleep." Callum pressed his lips to the top of Peggy's head. She made a small, contented sound and burrowed closer. He closed his eyes. He did not overwrite the old record. Not entirely. Not yet. But he placed it next to hers, and for the first time, he let himself consider the possibility that hers was the more accurate of the two. The 5th day was the quietest. The fever had cooled to a low ember, and with it the compulsion had softened. The truths still came, but they came slower now, like the last water draining from a basin. Peggy spent most of the day in their chambers, dozing by the fire, occasionally waking to murmur something about the quality of the blankets or the particular shade of afternoon light. Grit's broadcasts had thinned to a trickle too. The wolves of the pack reported a final, scattered series of assessments, mostly complimentary, a few mildly devastating. and then silence. The last thing Grit broadcast, according to Fen, was a single, exhausted observation directed at no one in particular. She loves him. She has always loved him. Every part of me that is her knows this without question. It is the most certain thing we have ever held. That is all. I am going to sleep now. Do not contact me. The pack's wolves, for the first time in nearly a week, had their own heads to themselves again. The relief was palpable. But something had shifted. Grit's broadcasts, embarrassing, invasive, unwelcome, had also been honest. And the honesty had been, on balance, more helpful than harmful. Duncan's tracking had improved. The young warriors' formations had tightened. 3 wolves who'd been carrying private grudges had been forced to confront them, and Bridget in the laundry had started a folding class. In the training yard, the evening patrol gathered for their shift run. As they moved toward the gate, one of the younger wolves, a rangy, copper-furred female named Bracken, paused and looked back toward the castle, toward the window where the queen's quarters were. Then she tilted her head back and let out a single, low howl. Not a warning, not a summons, just an acknowledgement. One by one, the other wolves joined. The sound rose, layered and harmonious, until it filled the courtyard and drifted up to where Peggy was sleeping. She stirred, smiled without opening her eyes, and settled back into sleep. Callum, standing at the armory window, heard the howl and understood it for what it was. Not a salute to their king, a thank you to their queen. The spring's magic faded on the 6th day, the way a fever breaks. Not with a dramatic snap, but with a slow, gradual quieting. Like color returning to a room as your eyes adjust, like sound after your ears stop ringing. Peggy woke that morning and lay very still, listening to the silence inside her own head. No compulsion, no rising tide of truths pressing against her teeth. Just her own thoughts, private and contained, hers again. Grit was there, fully present, walls back up, composure restored with the meticulous care of someone reshelving every book in a library that had been hit by an earthquake. Status report. Operational security reestablished. Broadcasting has ceased. I will now be conducting a thorough internal audit of everything I transmitted while compromised. This audit will be private, comprehensive, and never, ever discussed. Peggy almost laughed. Missed you. I was here the entire time. I was simply mortified. The memories were patchy. She remembered the fall, the taste of the water, Callum's panicked face. She remembered warmth, his arms, his voice, the steadiness of him. Beyond that, the days blurred into a fever dream of faces and feelings and words she couldn't quite reach. It was like trying to remember a dream you know was important, but can only hold in fragments. Callum told her some of it, not all at once, in pieces, over the next few days, while they walked the grounds or sat by the fire in the evenings. He parceled the stories out carefully, the way you feed someone who hasn't eaten in days. Small portions, gently offered, with space between them to digest. He told her about the escape first, because it was the safest. Thomas stepping aside with tears in his eyes, the sparring warriors abandoning their pretend rivalry, old Bridget's folding class. He told her about Grit's broadcasts and Duncan's tracking posture critique, and the 2 young wolves arguing in the mud about right flank exposure. She buried her face in her hands and groaned through her fingers. He told her about the howl, how the evening patrol had stopped at the gate and howled for her, one by one, until the whole courtyard rang with it. She went very quiet when he told her that. She held his hand and didn't say anything for a long time. He told her about the flirting, the grain report confession, the doorway observation, the "I'm always looking for you" speech in the great hall. She went very red. He told her about the promise, the one she apparently made every morning when she woke up and saw him sleeping beside her. She went very still. I said that? You said that? Out loud? In front of Marin and Marcus. She pressed her face into a cushion and made a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a laugh and had elements of both. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, very carefully, in the voice he used when something mattered so much he was afraid of breaking it, "I didn't know you did that. The morning thing." She didn't look up. "I didn't know I did it either. I mean, I knew, but I didn't know it was a whole speech. I thought it was just a feeling." It was more than a feeling. Apparently. When she finally lifted her face from the cushion, his expression stopped her. She had seen Callum in battle. She had seen him in grief. She had seen him angry and tired and stubborn and laughing. But this was something else. This was the face of a man who had carried something heavy for a very long time and had just discovered that someone had been walking beside him, holding the other end, without his ever knowing. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the firelight. "Callum?" He shook his head, tried to speak, stopped. The jaw thing, the one where he clenched it because he was feeling something too large for his face, was happening, and she watched it the way she always did, with a tenderness so deep it lived in her bones. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. "I know. I want to. He stopped again. The jaw thing was happening. And then something else happened, something she had never seen in 15 years of marriage. The jaw stopped clenching because the thing behind it was too large to be held. His eyes filled, not dramatically, not with a great heaving sob or a collapse. Callum Dunbar did not collapse. But his eyes filled, and one tear broke free and tracked down his cheek, and he didn't wipe it away. And that, the not wiping it away, was the thing that undid her, because it meant he wasn't hiding. For once, he wasn't hiding. "You said all of that," he managed, "about the pup names and Martin's barn and the Northern Watch, in front of the whole senior pack. You couldn't lie. Someone tried to use you to destroy me, and every truth you had about me was what? Kind. The word broke slightly on its way out. Every truth you had about me was kind, Peggy. I have spent my entire life wondering if I'm enough for this, and your answer, the answer you couldn't fake, was that I am good." The silence after he said it was the most important silence she had ever sat inside. She reached across the space between them and put both hands on his face, held him there, made him look at her. "That's because the truth about you is kind, you ridiculous man. I've been trying to tell you that for years. I just needed a sacred swimming pool to make you listen." He laughed, or tried to. It came out as something between a laugh and a sound she'd never heard him make before, rough and cracked open and completely real. She would remember that sound for the rest of her life. She would hear it in quiet moments, washing dishes, folding blankets, watching him sleep, and it would fill her chest with a warmth so fierce it was almost pain. It was the sound of a man who had finally let himself be seen, and found that what was looking back was love. He told her about Marcus and the pastries, and she laughed until her ribs ached, and then felt guilty, and then laughed again. He told her that Nessa had cornered Marcus the day after the broadcasts ended, and Marcus had confessed everything. The midnight kitchen visits, the stress eating, the fact that he'd been avoiding her because he'd accidentally used her favorite mixing bowl to make a terrible cake at 2 a.m, and then hidden the evidence. Nessa had listened to the entire confession with her arms folded, and then she'd kissed him, and then she'd made him clean the bowl. He told her about Gregor last, about the question and her answer. She listened with her hand over her mouth. "I said all that? About the watch and Martin's barn and the names?" "Every word." "And it was true? You really sat up 3 nights? That's not the point. It's entirely the point. Peggy, you never told me." "It wasn't worth telling." She gave him a look that could have peeled paint off a warship. "It was worth telling. Everything about you is worth telling. That's what I apparently spent a week shouting at anyone who would listen. And I was right." Gregor was dealt with quietly and decisively. Callum did not rage. He did not make a spectacle. He simply called the elder to his study, looked at him across the desk with the steady, patient gaze of a man who had been underestimated for the last time, and said, "You attempted to use my mate's illness to undermine my authority in front of the senior pack. You know the consequences." Gregor was stripped of his elder status and reassigned to the pack's most remote outpost, a solitary posting on the far northern border, where his audience would be limited to pine trees, the occasional passing elk, and his own reflection. It was not exile, technically. It was, as Marcus described it with considerable satisfaction, a lateral move with reduced social opportunities. The morning of the dawn patrol, 2 days after Peggy's recovery, Callum stood at the gates and watched his wolves run, 12 of them, shifting in sequence in the gray pre-dawn light, fur catching the first gold of sunrise as they flowed through the gate and into the forest. Duncan among them, his left shoulder consciously squared. The 2 young warriors who'd argued about flank exposure, running side by side now, their forms finally complementary instead of identical. He watched them disappear into the trees, and something in his chest unknotted. Rook stirred. The pack is well. The mate is well. The territory is secure. There is nothing that requires your attention for the next 45 minutes. Callum raised an eyebrow internally. I am suggesting you go back to bed. The mate is still sleeping. This is a rare tactical window. Do not waste it on grain reports. He went back to bed. Peggy was curled on her side, one hand tucked under the pillow, breathing slow and deep. He slipped in beside her, and she shifted toward him in her sleep, her back against his chest, her hand finding his and pulling it around her without waking. He lay there in the quiet morning light, holding the woman who had spent 6 days telling the world the truth about him. And the truth had been love, and he had not known. He had not known. He closed his eyes and let himself rest. Really rest. Just this once. 70 years later. The morning of the abdication was cool and bright, the kind of autumn day that felt like the world had been freshly polished. Callum Dunbar stood at the window of the same chambers he'd shared with Peggy for 7 decades and watched his son Ian cross the courtyard below. Ian walked the way Callum had once walked, straight-backed, deliberate, carrying the weight of what was coming with a steadiness that made his father's chest ache with pride. He was stepping down today, not because he had to. His body was still strong, his mind still sharp, and Rook still assessed every room with the same cold, tactical precision he always had. But because there was something he wanted more than power, and he'd finally grown wise enough to take it. You're doing the jaw thing, Peggy said from behind him. He turned. She was sitting in the reading chair. His reading chair, the one she'd claimed decades ago and he'd never once tried to reclaim. With a cup of tea in her hands and the same sharp, knowing look in her eyes that had undone him when they were young. Her hair was silver now, her face mapped with the fine lines of a life fully lived, and she was, he thought, as he had thought every morning for 70 years, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. I'm not doing the jaw thing. You are absolutely doing the jaw thing. You've been doing the jaw thing since before dawn. I heard you clenching from 3 rooms away. He crossed to her and sat on the arm of the chair, the way he'd done 10,000 times. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, and they stayed like that, watching the light move across the floor of a room that held a lifetime. Are you sure about this? She asked. I've never been more sure of anything. Liar. All right, I've been sure of one thing more. She looked up. What? He didn't answer. He just looked at her, and the answer was so obvious it didn't need a sacred spring or any other magic to be understood. She was it. She had always been it. From the soaking wet, truth-spilling disaster by the spring to this quiet autumn morning, she was the single fixed point around which his entire life had turned. Grit, ancient and undiminished, stirred in Peggy's mind. He's being romantic. It's revolting. Tell him I approve. Rook answered from across the bond, wolf to wolf, the way they'd spoken for 70 years. Noted. Filed under permanent record. The ceremony was simple. Ian knelt in the great hall. Callum spoke the old words, the ones his father had spoken to him, and his grandfather before that, and placed his hand on his son's head. The weight of the crown left him, not with grief, but with a relief so vast it made his eyes sting. He was not losing a kingdom. He was gaining mornings, afternoons, evenings with no agenda and no crisis and no grain report. Just the woman who had been looking for him every day for 70 years, even when he was right beside her. That evening, they walked the ridge above the castle. The same ridge, though the trees had grown tall around it. Below, the valley was gold and amber in the fading light. Somewhere down there, Ian was fielding his first crisis as king and handling it well. Somewhere down there, Duncan's granddaughter was running the Eastern Patrol with flawless posture, her tracking form immaculate, the family weakness finally corrected. Somewhere down there, Tomas, who had once stepped aside for a feverish queen and heard the truth about his father, was an elder now, steady and sure. Peggy leaned against his shoulder. Her tea had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She didn't care. "You know," she said, and her voice had the particular lilt that had meant trouble for 7 decades. "I heard they restored the Spring of Unspoken Truths last season. Put a lovely new stone path around it. Very safe. No exposed roots." "No." "I'm just saying, absolutely not. It might be nice to take a proper sip this time. One sip, the way you're actually supposed to. Just one small truth, done correctly, like civilized people." He looked at her. 70 years of love that had shown itself in 1,000 quiet ways, in the angle of a reading chair, in a hand reaching for his in sleep, in a promise made every morning that she hadn't known she was making until a magical spring tore it out of her and laid it at his feet like a gift. "I don't need the spring," he said. "I never did. You've been telling me the truth every day since I met you." "Oh, that's good," she said, delighted. "That's very good. You should have that embroidered on a cushion." "I'm trying to be sincere. And you're doing beautifully. The jaw thing really sells it." He laughed. It was the same laugh, the one from 70 years ago, the one from 40 years ago, the one from this morning. It was the sound of a man who had found his person and had the tremendous, improbable good sense to hold on. She took his hand, laced her weathered fingers through his, and they sat together on the ridge as the sun went down over the kingdom that was no longer theirs. 2 wolves, old and undiminished, with nowhere to be and nothing left to prove, and the whole of the evening stretching up before them like a promise. Some truths don't need a sacred spring. They just need time, and a life worth sharing, and someone who never stops looking for you, even when you're right there beside them.